Week 11 of the NFL season had a phenomenal ending with the Philadelphia Eagles versus the Kansas City Chiefs game. In the Super Bowl rematch, we witnessed the Philadelphia Eagles defeat the Kansas City Chiefs with a score of 21-17. However, this was a game where both these teams exploited each team's weaknesses. So in this video, I wanted to talk about not only this game, but I want to talk about both the Kansas City Chiefs and the Philadelphia Eagles separately. And then we'll kind of talk about some different things regarding the NFL and the future of the rest of the season. But with that out of the way, let's start off by talking about the Philadelphia Eagles as they were the victors of this game. For the Philadelphia Eagles, they definitely had a game plan to shut out Travis Kelce, and defensively in that second half, the Philadelphia Eagles were able to do just that. In fact, they were able to guard him pretty well the entire game. Defensively, the Eagles wanted these other receivers, guys like Rashee Rice, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Kadarius Toney, to beat them, and of course, they couldn't. And as for the offense for the Philadelphia Eagles, well, they did just enough to get the win. Offensively, I thought the play calling was very bizarre this week. Sure, the weather was very rainy and the conditions were not perfect, but ultimately, the play calling felt very safe and very predictable. In this game, we saw sort of a game plan to get the ball out of Jalen Hurts' hands quick, which in this game kind of fell into exactly what the Kansas City Chiefs defensively wanted them to do. And it's kind of bizarre because a lot of the good plays that happened for the Philadelphia Eagles were plays where Jalen Hurts would drop back and throw dimes. When Jalen Hurts was having these quarterback draws or these quick screens, nothing really came from them. The majority of their offense came from, like I said, Jalen Hurts dropbacks or running the ball with DeAndre Swift or some of these running backs. As we look at Jalen Hurts, he was 14 for 22 for 150 yards and 0 touchdowns with 1 interception, and then running the ball, he had 12 carries for 29 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think overall for Jalen Hurts, he had a decent game. This was not an MVP showcase game like we saw from him in the Super Bowl by no means, but in a game with some really questionable play calling, I do think that Jalen Hurts did a fine job of doing his job. And of course, when your offense has one of the better offensive lines to go along with the best receiving core in the entire NFL, you should be able to do your job at a pretty high rate. And what's really weird about this game is AJ Brown really did not have that great of a game. On the day, he only had 1 catch for 8 yards, and I don't really know if it was because of the Chiefs defense that really slowed him down, or if it was just the play calling and the type of night that didn't really showcase what he's good at. Instead, it was a huge game for Devontae Smith, who had 6 catches for 99 yards. Devontae also had the biggest play of the entire game for that Eagles offense. I will say this, without Dallas Goedert, this offense does kind of look a little bit weird. I do think if Dallas Goedert can come back pretty soon, I do think this offense can get going again. It was just a really weird and bizarre offensive night for this team because typically they're not afraid to drop back and let Jalen Hurts cook. So maybe that has something to do with the injury, or maybe it was just a bad play calling night. But moving on, and aside from this game, for the Eagles, you're now 9-1 and have a firm grip on the NFC and of course the NFC East. The Lions, the Niners, and the Cowboys were probably praying to God they lost this game, and of course they didn't. The good news though for the rest of the NFC is that there are some tough matchups ahead for the Philadelphia Eagles, but this was a game that was very losable for them, and I'm honestly kind of shocked they didn't lose this game because throughout the entire game, I thought the Chiefs had a pretty firm grip on that game. But speaking of the Chiefs, let's go ahead and talk about the Chiefs real quick. And man, if you're a Chiefs fan or a Chiefs player, you're probably kicking yourself in your ass right now because this was an extremely winnable game. Not only did you have a 10-point lead at halftime, but you were leading heading into the fourth quarter. And offensively, they just fell completely flat in that second half, despite actually having some drives that would end up in the red zone. They had a couple red zone trips that ended in turnovers, the Travis Kelce fumble, the Patrick Mahomes interception. Those are things you typically don't see from their 2-star players on offense. And in this game, similar to the Eagles really exploited their problems. This Patrick Mahomes-led offense does not have many weapons outside of Travis Kelce. And even with Travis Kelce, he's kind of taken a small step back this season. Now, Travis will still end up probably being a 1,000-yard receiver this year, but that's just because he's heads and levels above the rest of the talent on this team. But he's now in his mid-30s, and at this point of his career, he's kind of falling off just a tad bit. And if you look outside of Travis Kelce, your best number 2 receiver is Rashee Rice, and then I would argue the third best receiving option outside of that would be Justin Watson, your backup tight end, because Mecole Hardman, Kadarius Toney, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, not only do they have butterfingers, but they're not really that special. I think Kadarius Toney can be a special athlete, and when he gets that ball in his hands on kickoff and punt returns, I think he's special with the ball in his hands. But I think teams kind of understand that he's not a very good route runner, so he's going to be doing a lot of screens and stuff, and that makes it pretty easy for the team to rally and make tackles on him. And the rest of these receivers are just not very good. Hell, Mecole Hardman was the 3rd best receiver on that Jets team and had like 0 catches through 9 weeks. So of course he's going to come here and not really make a big impact. Now typically Patrick Mahomes is able to overcome these problems because of how good he is, but I think in this situation, I think this might be a little bit too much for him to overcome. He's got an offensive line that does not play really special, and he has a receiving core that is not good at all. So the recipe for this Kansas City Chiefs team to win is to rely on the defense, run the ball effectively, and let Patrick Mahomes cook on certain downs. But in a game where Patrick Mahomes threw the ball 43 times, he was not really able to do a whole lot with it. Despite having 24 completions, he only threw for 177 yards. He also had an interception, which I know that the announcer said wasn't his fault, but I'm actually going to put a little bit of the blame on Patrick on that one. Now, you take into account that big Marquez Valdes-Scantling drop, which probably would have won the game, then you probably would add about another 70 yards to that total. Again, I'm not blaming this on Patrick Mahomes because he had a pretty solid game, all things considered. In a game where there was a couple turnovers on his team, the offensive line was not really protecting him all that well, and the receivers were dropping a lot of passes, I thought Patrick Mahomes made some really nice plays. The throw to, I believe, Justin Watson on the corner route was a thing of beauty, not to mention the throw to Marquez Valdes-Scantling was a thing of beauty. But the weaknesses on this roster, I think, might be a little bit too much for them to overcome, especially when Travis Kelce's not having a 100-yard game, which he has not had in a couple weeks now. So yes, they're still true contenders, and in my opinion, they're still probably the favorites for the AFC, but that's just because a lot of the AFC teams that we thought were contenders are kind of falling off a little bit. I think the only team that can really compete with the Chiefs at this current point would be the Baltimore Ravens and potentially the Buffalo Bills if they get things together. But the Bengals, who were my favorites to win the AFC, are basically out of the race at this point. The Chiefs do not feed the Cleveland Browns and the Pittsburgh Steelers, who might make the playoffs. I'm sure they wouldn't even mind seeing the Miami Dolphins because I do think they can beat that team again. The only teams, in my opinion, that can legitimately put up a fight against this Chiefs teams, in my opinion, is the Bills with Josh Allen and of course what he can do, and of course the Baltimore Ravens. But then again, with the Bills, we were just talking about them a few weeks ago and how they are looking terrible. But if this week that just happened against the Jets is any indication of where that team is going, then hey, yes, maybe they could contend against the Chiefs, but for now, it's hard to say. And truthfully, it's kind of crazy because at the start of the season, we were really talking about how much of a gauntlet the AFC was, because in the beginning of the season, you had the Bengals, the Bills, the Chargers, the Ravens, the Chiefs, all these really good teams, and then all of a sudden, one by one, these teams started picking each other apart to the point now where you only have a handful of teams that are really good. So I raised this question: was this a Super Bowl preview? Because right now, I think the Philadelphia Eagles are the best team in the entire NFL, regardless of their weaknesses, and regardless of the Kansas City Chiefs' weaknesses, I think they're probably still the best team in the AFC. So we're talking about the Eagles versus the Chiefs again in the Super Bowl, which, by the way, the NFL would absolutely love that, because of course this would be the third bout against these two teams. And truth be told, I actually would not mind seeing a third game between these teams in the Super Bowl, because in round one in the Super Bowl, the Chiefs won the game when arguably the Philadelphia Eagles should have won the game because of that holding penalty. And then in round two, the Chiefs lost the game and the Eagles won the game, but again, the Chiefs probably should have won the game because they had the drop from Marquez Valdes-Scantling. So who would win round three? I don't really have the answer to that. I genuinely think these teams match up so well with one another that it is a truly incredible matchup. It's one of the few matchups where when these two teams play each other, we know we're going to get a great game. It's not like it's going to be a defensive slugfest, or it's not like it's going to be an offensive shootout where the defense is playing no defense, because both teams have good offenses and good defenses with great coaching and great quarterbacks. Not to mention Travis Kelce, Jason Kelce. So yeah, the NFL would love that, and I think NFL fans would for the most part enjoy it as well. But let's move on from that and kind of look at the rest of the season for both of these rosters. At this point in the season, the Kansas City Chiefs do not really have much wiggle room to lose many more games, especially if they want to win the AFC, whereas the Eagles do have a little bit of wiggle room, but ultimately you don't want to lose too many games because of course there are other teams looking to take your spot. For the Eagles, the rest of the season looks like this. You have the Buffalo Bills, you have the 49ers, you have the Cowboys, you have the Seahawks, you have the Giants, you have the Cardinals, and then the Giants again. This upcoming stretch for the Eagles is going to be extremely interesting. I do think that Bills game is going to be extremely fun, and of course the 49ers and Cowboys games will also be very entertaining. I do think the last four games against the Seahawks, the Giants twice, and the Cardinals should be pretty easy wins for the Eagles. So if they can handle business against the Bills, 49ers, and Cowboys, then hey, they're probably going to win the NFC pretty easily. I do predict they'll lose to the 49ers and the Cowboys though, because I think those teams have the reasons to beat this team at this point. But even if they do win those games, I still think the Eagles have enough to potentially win the NFC as a whole. So that should be interesting, and I think all those games are going to be extremely fun, of course outside of those two Giants and Cardinals games, because they are going to dominate them. And as it goes for the Kansas City Chiefs, your schedule for the most part is pretty easy moving forward. You have a matchup against the Las Vegas Raiders, which got a little bit more interesting, but ultimately I do think you win that game pretty easily. Same with the Packers. The Bills is an interesting game, given now that the Bills look really good. That is a game that is going to be played at Arrowhead, so I think the Chiefs can win that one, but ultimately I am very interested in that one. Then they face the Patriots, again, pretty easy win. Raiders, Bengals, and Chargers. With the Bengals losing Joe Burrow, that one should be a pretty easy win, and that Chargers game should also be an easy win, as at this point in the season the Chargers are a complete mess. Stay tuned for a Chargers video, by the way. So I think worst case scenario, you split with the Raiders and you lose to the Bills and you're 12-5 or something like that, which may not be enough to win the conference, but if they do beat the Raiders twice and they win all their games they should win, they should probably still end up as the winners of the conference. As for the Philadelphia Eagles, I do think, like I said, that they're probably going to lose 2 games out of the next 7 they do have, which honestly, truth be told, they may end up winning winning out completely. I would not be shocked by that. Whichever way you do cut it, I do think they've played really good football, and I do think that they're going to continue to play good football, so I think they'll ultimately win the conference pretty easily, which means the playoffs would run through Philadelphia, which is a very interesting atmosphere to go through. But we'll just kind of have to wait and see how the rest of the season plays out. But let me know in the comment section below what you guys thought of not only this game, but what you guys think of the future for the NFL regarding the Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs. Would you guys like to see a part 3 of this matchup in the Super Bowl, or is it time that we see a new matchup in this year's Super Bowl? And if you did enjoy my portion of the video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button because it helps me out an absolute ton. But I love you guys. Peace.